I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca with the San Antonio Express News. We're here to wrap up UTSA's big 48-27 win over
Nailed
North
it.
Texas. Yes. The day after, the night after the big win, Greg, the Roadrunners pull out a massive win against a heated rival. And for the most part, it seemed like it was a one-sided affair. The fourth quarter did have a few anxious moments, but UTSA kind of wins this one going away.
Yeah, I think there's a couple big angles to look at coming out of it. You can talk about the offense overall, 681 yards is a program record. You can talk about what it means for this season in terms of being one win away from bowl eligibility with a very winnable game against Temple coming up. And I think you can talk about what it means for the program in Jeff Traylor's tenure this year and beyond with the resiliency the team showed and keeping with the culture. So where do you want to start?
Let's start right there with point number one, the offense. UTSA explodes for 681 total yards. Pretty balanced effort. I think if you look at the rushing stats and you didn't watch the game, maybe it seems like the run game is fixed, but I don't know that it is, right? Owen McCown had a good game passing and rushing. And just big days all the way around. Robert Henry with a few massive, massive rushes. Um, David Amador with a monster game, and the tight ends still, right? And then, of course, Owen. I believe we noted at one point in the first half he was 20 of 23, and those three passes probably could have been caught or were very close to being catches. And it was as good as I think we've seen Owen spin it this last game.
Yeah, I don't think he threw a proper incompletion until like that 23rd pass when he was trying to hit Carpenter in the corner of the end zone and it was
Right.
overthrown a little bit. And even that one wasn't that far off. But the first two incompletions were like 30 yards downfield and were perfect passes that hit the receivers in the hands and they weren't able to make the catch. So, yeah, just another unbelievable game from Owen. I think we're getting to the point where we'll have to talk about it when he doesn't play well. You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of just what we're coming to expect from him with these last recent games and how well he's been able to keep the offense moving. So, he just gets better and better as he has more experience here. Even the interception in this game was a tipped ball. It wasn't a great throw, but it was not like he was not anything too egregious. And yeah, he was really on the money most of the game. And I think he's getting better at some of the stuff we talked about earlier in the season of putting the offense in positions to succeed and understanding when to check and where to go with the RPOs and all that stuff. So I think we're just going to see better and better from him as the years go on.
I wanted to ask you about the impact of David Amador. That's obviously a unit that has been, struggling with injuries, and he comes back the last game and has an immediate impact. And I think you see what he brings to the table and kind of what UTSA has been missing with him out all this season.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, you understand how, with going spring, summer, and into the preseason, all the stuff it seemed like they worked on, a lot of the more interesting looks or the things that are going to keep defenses on their toes seem to have him heavily involved. And I'm not just talking about the trick plays, but just a lot of the different pre-snap motions and some of the intermediate routes he runs where your Chris Carpenters and your Willie McCoys are more suited for these deep routes. Devin McEwen is sort of a good all-around type of receiver, but with him injured, especially, the offense is kind of limited until you can bring this Amador dynamic in there, and he could line up anywhere and contribute in a lot of different ways. So, he's the kind of guy you want sneaking over the middle on that screen pass that he ends up taking for a long touchdown, and then everything else he brings to the table as well. So, yeah, I think that changes their offense quite a bit.
Yeah, that just the dynamic of the screens, right? And what it does to kind of open up the rest of the offense. We saw the tight ends continue to have big games, and you know, the offensive line played as good as I think anyone could expect. We saw a few guys go down. UTSA had to ended the game with two different tackles than what they started with, right? So we'll have to monitor that situation moving forward. But just kind of buttoning up all the offense, Greg. Where the injuries obviously are a huge storyline at this point of the season, but I mean, did you have a school record 681 yards on your bingo card this year for this offense?
Yeah, I don't know if that would have been in the cards. I mean, in a matchup like North Texas is where it's going to happen if it's going to
Right.
happen because of how fast that they play. You saw UTSA really dominate the time of possession, almost 40 minutes there. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the play calling too.
Yep.
You mentioned the offensive line holding up, but it felt like they were always in good situations where they're pass blocking against a three-man rush, and every time North Texas went to blitz, it felt like UTSA had a screen called. Like they were just one step ahead in the chess match of the play calling game. It felt like so they exploited everything that North Texas was trying to do, and I think guess it's not that surprising that North Texas ended up moving on from their DC today, if I saw that right. So. Um, yeah, just a great game from Justin Burke, I think. And I know he's faced some criticism at times this year. You asked about that a couple of times after the game, and yeah, it was good to see that he seemed to push all the right buttons at the right time.
Yep. The much maligned offensive coordinator now has a
And
pretty good
Amateur is
stat
part
in
of
his
that. Amateur is part of that too.
yeah,
I want to say
right?
just he has more buttons that he can push now that he has this guy available that featured into so many different looks that they wanted to throw at teams. So I think you're sort of seeing what he can do when he has all the tools at his disposal. And one other note on that is I think when we talked about the criticism of him, it was a lot of how well he adjusted to different situations. And to hear Owen talk about it after the game, it sounded like North Texas gave them a three safety look that they weren't really expecting. So to have the adjustment to that on the fly from the offensive play calling to produce a record setting game is sort of answering all the questions that people had about him coming into this matchup.
Yep, another a big showing from the offense all the way around. I think the play of the defense is going to get lost in this one, right? Because North Texas put up some big yards in the second half, kind of the middle part of the game, and the defense stepped up though. They came away with some big time stops on fourth down, third down stops. You know, the turnovers, the Zay Frazier two interceptions are huge in this game, right? You have the streak of 20 games with the turnover and sack now, and you know the chunk plays I think have been really killer for this defensive unit, but if you kind of look at those in a vacuum, this unit I think is kind of about where they should be, all things considered, right?
Well, I know they still got killed on some big plays in this one.
Right.
Some of those long rushes are not plays that you want to allow, especially when that's been UTSA's calling card. But you can't take away everything. I'm sure they were sort of gearing more towards slowing down the passing game and were extremely effective in that regard. We probably would have expected much more production out of Chandler Morris than what we ended up seeing in this matchup. So they did a good job taking away the pass, and I think they did it by kind of sitting back and playing coverage a lot, which you can go different ways on how you want to handle a team that throws as much as North Texas does. I tend to think when their screen game is as strong as it is and the air raid is designed to get the ball out so quickly that you're better off trying to sit back and play coverage. And that's what UTSA did for the most part. And it allowed North Texas to sort of have to turn to the ground game for a lot of their big plays. And I think it led to some of the takeaways you saw with the Tuesday Frazier interceptions. So yeah, especially with some of the injuries they've had in the secondary, to not have Ken Robinson out there, in particular at safety, where that's a guy you would want to be able to make a lot of the different adjustments and calls against a team like this. For them to play as well as they did, I think, maybe not outstanding, but it was good.
Well, do we want to talk about the special teams just to hit all three phases here? Tate Sandell, 4 for 4 on field goals and a pretty good onside kick there.
Yeah, I mean that personally, I think if it was the other way around, North Texas wants to catch that onside kick. It
Yeah.
wasn't, he kicked it pretty heavy. It went right to the guy. So, I mean, they easily could have just got that one, but it was a gutsy call to go for it when they did, and it did work out for them. So, I love that it seems like every week somebody on UTSA's staff says, how do these guys play kickoffs and can we sneak one in there? Because we see that pretty regularly from the staff that they'll go for it at different times. And they pick the right spots for it. There's been games where we come into it thinking it might be a surprise onside kick game, and they still pull it out when it's like, oh yeah, I forgot, I thought that was going to happen. So they're really good at knowing when to do that. So execution on that one worked out. I don't know if they're going to look at it perfectly on film, but yeah, I love that they go for that stuff because it does make a huge difference, even if they
Yeah.
didn't end up scoring on that drive.
Right, right. So, Greg, what does this program, what does this win mean for where UTSA is at this season, right? Because I think I wrote something late last night, early this morning. It's hard for me to remember because
Yeah.
it's all meshed together. But about, Jeff Traylor was talking about this is a testament to the team's culture, right? There were a lot of questions. I mean, not that they were not unfair questions, but they talk about this culture and what it means, and it's kind of not a tangible thing that you could wrap your arms around it. But here they are. They could have easily packed it in after any one of the three losses in the recent month, and they didn't. And they have two pretty solid, almost season-defining wins to show for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've said from the start that everybody says their culture is great when they're winning, and everybody says their culture is bad when they're losing. And so to say that we get dragged for this because we're in the room, but to say that we question the culture this year, I guess is literally correct because I just wanted to see how it was going to look when they were 3-5 and had these rough starts that they had to overcome, and just because they've never been in that position before. And all along, Coach Traylor has said, the energy at practice is good. Everybody's still focused. And so I wrote it. I don't know if I necessarily believed it because, again, that's just sort of the right thing to say. But then to see the results translate on the field the last two games, it becomes a lot easier to believe that, yeah, despite all the things that they've faced, they've still kind of held strong. And there's been 1 or 2 days where I poked my head into practice because I got to interviews early or whatever. And it certainly didn't feel like the energy was entirely different from what we've seen when things were going well. So, I mean, I believe what he's saying in that regard, and it's translating in the results. So yeah, I guess it's hard to knock the culture if anybody was doing that. I mean, it doesn't change that some of these losses earlier in the year were based on things like penalties and mental mistakes and just generally not clean play from UTSA. So, I saw somebody on Twitter after the game ask if this season was Jeff Traylor's best coaching job. And I literally thought it was a joke because like of how heavily everyone's been on this guy and his staff for the whole season. But I could see where somebody could try to paint it that way now because clearly they have made tremendous progress with this team. But I also think it's fair to ask the flip side where it's like, well, if this is what these guys are capable of, then why did it look nothing like this for the first half of the year? Some of it you can point to experience, but a lot of the guys that were making those early mistakes were some of the veteran guys on this team too. So I don't know. I just think it's kind of a complicated situation, but I'm glad everybody's feeling great right now. I mean, they have a chance to make this season one that they can still be pretty proud of if they can end up with a winning record.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in the middle, like right,
It always is, right?
yeah, as per usual. So you alluded to it. The Roadrunners are one game away from bowl eligibility, Greg. It is hard to pick against this team at home. Just a phenomenal home record. I mean, you could count the losses on one hand, right? The two to Army and that one to Houston, and the rest they've dominated at home. So the Roadrunners will probably be favored next week at home on a Friday night matchup against Temple to try and reach bowl eligibility. Then they hit the road against Army to see, kind of like a real test, right? The road test. So what does this mean for the season? I mean, did have the Roadrunners save their season? Is bowl eligibility good enough at this point, considering everything that has occurred?
Yeah, so it's hard to argue with 28-3 at home. I think it is now, and 15-2 in November. I might have added one to those. I feel like I keep forgetting where the actual number is at, but something in the neighborhood. And so with Temple having the season that they've had, you would expect that UTSA would be able to win that game and then get bowl eligibility. And then it just gets really complicated because trying to predict what's going to happen at Army is tough because theoretically it's a decent matchup for UTSA with their ability to stop the run, but that's been true every year and they always haven't had success against that team. And especially this season with 0 road wins, I don't know, like it's anybody's guess what this version of UTSA looks like in that matchup in that environment, especially given that even
Army's
UTSA,
clinched. Army's
yeah,
clinched already a spot in the game, but there's the dynamic of who hosts, right?
yeah, and I don't even know if they're wired like that. Like they
Yeah.
might just be psychos.
Yeah.
So, and then there's probably some playoff implications they're fighting for too. Last I checked, Boise State was losing, so I don't know where that stands right now, but that could get really interesting as well. So I assume you're getting their best effort. I don't think they have a different gear, so I wouldn't count on that part of it. But generally, I do think UTSA has the tools to be competitive in that game, but we're looking pretty far ahead. I think just sort of how to put the season in perspective will get really complicated because you can imagine if they win 3 straight games to close it out, that upset at Army would be huge. And if they win whatever bowl game, and now you're looking at an 8-5 season, and that like looks really good on paper. But there's the other way where maybe they split these two, and then you get to the bowl game, and then it's like how locked in is everybody for the bowl game? You have that conversation every year of how much does this really matter in the scope of the season, and so yeah, I think it's going to be a hard one to put into perspective. I will always be a downer, I guess, and try to remember that coming into the year, this team really thought they'd be in the playoff chase at this time, and that would be the kind of conversation we'd be having, comparing them to the Boise States of the world. So from that perspective, it's going to be hard to ever have a season that's anything other than disappointing. But people, especially with college football, just fans and the media and everybody who follows it, tends to have mood changes pretty quickly. So you get on a little winning streak here to close it out, and I think people will be feeling pretty good. I don't know, where do you stand on all that?
I mean I'm right there with you, right? The preseason expectations were there, but you can't look at everything in a vacuum, right? These seasons ebb and flow, and if you're not Boise State or Memphis, or you're not gonna be consist having these consistent winning seasons, I don't think. So you just gotta to roll with it. A 7-win season is a good season. You know, an 8-win season is a very good season, and you're talking about a program that just won their first bowl game last year, right? So to be able to double that number is a huge opportunity. And I mean, let's face it, this roster may look significantly different next season, right? So who knows? I mean, signing day, not to jump too far ahead. There in the earlier period is like 2 weeks and 3 days away, and who knows what happens with the portal and who decides to go and who they're looking at bringing in. And it's a different kind of era in college football, and the Roadrunners have to find a way to adjust, and I think they're doing some of that on the fly. So the potential to be a good season, I think, in this last 2 or 3 games that UTSA may have.
Yeah, I think we're still kind of recalibrating how we talk about the sport, right? Because 5 years ago, you could start penciling out a depth chart for next season of who are the underclassmen who are going to return, and you'd have a pretty good idea of who's coming in because they would have had to sit out a year to transfer, and so you'd know who was going to be eligible the next season. And now, Jeff Traylor has said multiple times, and I'm sort of have incorporated it into how I think about things, is that every team is a 1 year team. So from that perspective, you do have to look at every season in a vacuum because that's the one chance you get with that team, and that's true every year. But I think even more now with this era. So at least by all indications that Owen McCown will be back, and so that's one piece to build around. And then it seems like it'd be hard to pick which guys you think are going to get poached. It's not like that's happened a lot here as much as we talk about it. It's been 3 or 4 guys in this portal era. So you would think that a lot of the guys who are underclassmen on the depth chart are going to be around for another lap, but it's just impossible to sort of lock that in with any certainty. So again, I just would take this year for what it is, and if they finish strong, you can have some positive vibes coming into next season, presuming the depth chart sort of holds, and that is the same team that goes into next year.
Yeah, I do think too it's worth monitoring. I think we talk about it almost too much, right? But the injury situation is what it is, right? I mean, we saw Amador go down with a shoulder, but he came back, and a few other guys got banged up, and you got McEwen out there. That's potentially a huge add to come back, and I mean that'll certainly impact what we see against Army, I think, right? You would hope UTSA as is could find a way against Temple and get that 6 win and kind of just see what lies ahead with whatever bowl game they would be invited to at that point.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Sometimes it's felt like we've talked about it too much, but I think in this particular show, we haven't talked about it enough with the injuries because, yeah, when I talk about, they didn't live up to preseason expectations, I do have to probably cook that in a little bit more. But early in the season, that also wasn't as big of an issue as it's become later in the year. So maybe it's appropriately rated at this point,
Yeah.
the impact that injuries have had on the season. But certainly for them to do what they've done the last couple of weeks in the perspective of that, thinking that Mekhi Hart would be your top tackle and DeCorian Clark would be your top receiver and Ken Robinson would be your number one safety, and that you'd have a lot of different depth at other positions, or that the offensive line might look a little bit different, and all these different things, I think it is relevant. So yeah, I don't want to overlook that part of it. They might deserve a little more credit than I've given them.
What we miss anything? What was there a specific angle you took to recap last night's game?
Yeah, it was all about the culture, I think. I mean, I don't know. I kind of went off on that, and I don't know that you said too much about it. If you want to share your opinion on the resiliency and just sort of the things you've seen in that regard, but that's been the most impressive part to me.
Yeah, I think the biggest part is there's still like a carrot out there, right? For them to still be able to stay competitive in the season, reach that bowl game. I mean, there's a lot of seniors on this roster, right, that are trying to get to that bowl game and win their last game. So I think that's been huge in the morale, right? I think if they would have been mathematically eliminated at any point, maybe it's a different story because I mean, you're still seeing some of the struggles, right? We saw, I mean, eight penalties, I believe. That still isn't great, but it's an improvement. And the run game probably still isn't how they want to do it, and having to pass 40, almost, what is it, 43 times, whatever it was, a game.
Yep.
Probably, yeah, probably isn't the way they want to do it. So they're making it work the way and the best way they know how at this point. So yeah, but do credit to everybody. Nobody ever splintered. We haven't heard any, you know, negativity or anything come out of the locker room. So I do think that deserves certainly attention because that, I mean, I would have quit after Tulsa. You know what I mean? Like that was as bad as it gets. And you talk about the Rice and East Carolina game. I mean, that's tough.
But yeah, the point that can't be understated about that is the manner in which those losses happened. And anybody who is watching this, at least this far into the video, has lived through it. So I don't need to say too much about it. But Texas State, Rice, and Tulsa are all losses that you could see just sort of tanking a team's season and just kind of crushing somebody's will to continue on, where one loss turns into two, or people are thinking about getting in the portal or whatever the case may be. And it doesn't look like any of that happened. I mean, we haven't even seen a ton of guys who are taking red shirts, saying, oh, I've played my 4 games and that's it. There's been talk of that around the country in cases where that became a thing. And there's one or two here, but I don't even know that those are with the intent of transferring. They might just
Right.
want to save
They
the extra
want an
year.
extra year. Yeah.
Um, so from that perspective, you can see where it does feel like everybody's kind of locked in, despite 3 different games that could have broken a team spirit.
Yep. Well, Greg, anything else? I think we hit on everything for this one.
No, how would you like basketball today? I felt you have fun.
It was interesting. We could talk about the hoops a little bit. What's the record now? 1-2 on the season.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah. So pretty rough showing by the Roadrunners, right? A brand new team, 15 new players, and they're struggling to kind of find the rhythm. Austin Klonch said afterwards that they need to figure out what their identity is. They got this weird kind of part of the schedule where I think they're off for 8 days and then they have a 3 games kind of fairly quickly. So we'll see how that, I mean, it's hard to set the expectations. He wanted to come in here and win, and obviously I think he's disappointed in the at least the last 2 games where they haven't played well.
So here's one thing I'll say about this team is if you asked me a month ago, what is it going to look like? It probably would have been a lot like this, where they play fast, they take a lot of 3-pointers, they play pressure, and they clearly have some athletes to be able to play some defense, but the shooting percentages are not going to be great, and they might struggle on offense as a result. And so to see that translate on the court and have that kind of be the MO says that at the very least, the team kind of fits the identity that Austin Clonch wants to bring here. I mean, obviously, you always want it to be a little more successful and a little higher efficiency, but at least they sort of are fitting the mold. And I think once Terrion Joseph comes back is when I really want to lock in on this team, because then you'll kind of have a sense of what it's going to look like. Because he could end up being the primary scorer and primary ball handler for this team, just depending on the way everything sort of takes shape. So I don't want to read too much into it when one of their best guys hasn't been available. And I think the starting center missed a couple games too. So I think they're kind of still figuring it out, not just from the perspective of being a new team and a new coach young in the season, but from not even having all of the guys of that new team available. So, there's not much to get excited about, but I think it's still kind of a wait and see.
Yeah, and I will go out on a limb and say Joseph may be the best scorer on the team, right? And he's got a
Statistically,
eligibility issue, right? So another year of UTSA's best scorer trying to get eligible. So that's something we've heard before. So an uphill battle. I think they'll be okay at some point this season, right? It's just how long till we get there. And let's give a shout out to Karen Aston and the women's team.
yeah.
That program has looked pretty good to start this season early on. Big win today.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Jenkins is just awesome. They'll go as far as she can take them. And I think you saw last year, even towards the end of the season, she obviously came back late from that offseason injury and was still not necessarily at 100% by the time the end of the year got here. And we're seeing what it looks like when she's at full speed. So her shooting percentage must be through the roof, because I feel like every game I check, she's 8 for 10 or 10 for 12 or whatever. She scored 30 today. So they will go as far as she can take her, but that's not to say she's the only player. I mean, we saw Sydney Love play really well in the home opener that I covered, and Nina De Leon from Incarnate Word missed a game, but then she ended up coming back and playing a big role today. So, and they still have I don't know if Asia Proctor is or isn't going to come back this season, but she provided a real 3-point threat for that team. So it'll just be interesting to see what they look like as the year goes on as well. But even in their current form, obviously it looks really good as long as Jordan Jenkins is out there. And the question with her is always going to be foul trouble. That's popped up in different games where you need her to have a big game and she ends up not being able to play more than 20 or 25 minutes. So as long as they keep that part in check, she can provide the scoring load to take this team pretty far.
Brand new banner in the historic Convocation Center with the women's NIT run that UTSA Women's Hoops had last season. So I noticed that.
Sure.
So yeah, pretty interesting. We'll see where both programs kind of stack up. Historically, the American has been a pretty good basketball. They've had pretty good basketball programs on the men's side, obviously, right? And the women's UTSA is trying to kind of carve their niche into it. So we'll kind of monitor all of those situations as the season goes on.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the strength of the women's side. I'm not as up to date on that, but I know on the men's side, UTSA could improve a lot and still be one of the bottom two or three teams. So I wouldn't set super high expectations there, but you just want to see them take steps in a positive direction and put a better product out there and maybe steal a game here or there.
Yep. We'll see. We'll see. It'll be interesting times. The rare part of the calendar where you got football overlapping with basketball and there's stuff happening almost every other day. So
Then
we'll
signing day jumps out of nowhere.
yeah, 2 weeks and 3 days or something. So we'll see. We'll see. Well, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up for this week. I appreciate everybody watching. UTSA gets the big win against rival North Texas. One win away from bowl eligibility. Another Friday night game this week. Check in back with us during the week for all of our pregame coverage. Greg, I appreciate you joining. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. That's Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.